Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Language of Leadership webinar hosted by Anitian. I'm Andrew Plato, CEO of Anitian, and I want to thank all of you for taking the time today to join us and to talk about this daunting topic that faces all of us in the workforce. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we are going to talk about why it is, frankly, so difficult to communicate with people in leadership roles. Now, when we say leadership roles, what we mean by that is people like CEOs, CIOs, maybe CISOs, but also boards of directors, anybody who's in a leadership or managerial type of role. And you might be an employee or maybe you're another leader in the organization. Why is that conversation difficult? And then ultimately, what can we do to make that conversation, whether it's verbal or written, what can we do to make that better? Now, toward the latter part of our webinar today, we're going to also address the challenges of communication in a millennial-dominated workforce, which, as many of you probably know, the millennial generation is going to be pretty much taking over the workforce here in the next few years. And how is that going to affect and change this dynamic in this relationship? So let me take a second. I'd like to introduce each of our panelists today. So first panelist is, of course, myself, and I am Andrew Plato, CEO of Anitian. And Anitian is a comprehensive security intelligence provider. See, at Anitian, we believe that security is essential to growth, innovation, and prosperity. And so we're on a mission to build great security leaders. And we do that through our four main practice areas of risk assessment, compliance, penetration testing, and managed threat intelligence. So our other panelist today is Rob Warmick, the CEO of Complete. So Complete is a comprehensive workforce compliance automation platform, SaaS-based, and provides many of the ways to automate policy signatures, reducing the potential, as it says here, for consequences of fines, penalties, claims, and litigation. Rob, thank you very much for joining us today. Our other panelist today is Gordon Shevlin, who's the CEO of Allgress. Allgress provides a comprehensive governance and risk compliance platform, also SaaS-based. They help manage things like compliance, risk assessments, vulnerability management, policy dissemination, very comprehensive GRC tool. Thank you, Gordon, for joining us today. Okay, so with all that in mind, now that we've gotten the intros out of the way, let's start with our first big question, which, Gordon, Rob, I know we've chatted a little bit about this. Why is it so difficult to communicate with leaders? And Gordon, I'll throw this question to you first. What are your thoughts on this? Why do employees, why do they struggle so much in communication with leadership?
One of the key factors in the communication of leadership, and even when people are coming to me, being the CEO, is what is it that my world I'm living in? And I'll give you a great example. If you tell me something that we have 250 malware per month, well, what does that constitute? What does that mean to me? So when you're communicating with leadership, you have to communicate in a style and way that they understand and articulate the real value of what you're saying. And that is the key to communications with leadership, is what is it that they're trying to know, to understand, to make good decisions. So that's the key.
Rob, what are your thoughts on this?
I think Gordon is spot on, and I think I have the same thing to say, but maybe I'll come at it from a different perspective. I think with any communication, it depends on both audiences need to be in the same wavelength. So for the audience, think about how their direct reports speak to them. So that, you guys we're all leaders in some portion or another, whether you are head of a family or head of a department or head of a company. So each party in the communication probably has a different perspective and context when they're hearing something. So when someone comes into my office, like Gordon was saying, and hits a level of detail that is functionally specific, I got to put that in the context of the moment and the bigger business. And I'm constantly trying to translate, what does this matter to me? What does this matter to the business? So to the degree that anyone can jump into the skin of the other party, communication becomes difficult. Now, the problem with perhaps leader is we wear so many hats that you don't really know which head of the hydra you're talking to as you walk in on the moment, what kind of mood we're in, right? So by attesting your point, your relevancy, and helping that leader get on that same page, things just go a lot quicker. But the difficulty comes as we're just moving a million miles a minute, and it's just a matter of getting on that same page at that moment in time so you can have a good conversation.
I'd say what you're saying there is kind of the challenge of what I would call as a contextual challenge. The fact that the leadership's context is often very large. You're dealing with a huge set of issues, whereas as an employee or as a report to that, you're only dealing with maybe a handful of issues, and therefore, there's there's this sort of difference between prioritization. I think of it as, when people come to me and they want to talk about, or they want to, they have an issue that's bothering them, I think sometimes they don't realize that there's the number of issues that any leader has to deal with is significantly larger, and more importantly, they have to prioritize those. And your issue just might simply not be at the priority you want it to be. That creates kind of as we like to say at Anitian, a perception gradient. Actually, you had a good word for this, Rob. You had a different word for the same
yeah, from a little electrical engineering, a little impedance mismatch.
Impedance mismatch.
That was good. Great. I like that too.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I kind of think of this in the context of the sort of the captain of the ship principle, right? As a captain, I got to keep the whole ship moving. I got to keep the whole ship running, and I've got to make sure the whole ship stays on course and stays on its mission. And any one person who I'm interacting with, they have a responsibility and a good an aspect of the ship that they have to deal with, but not every aspect is equal. The guy who runs the engine and the guy who runs the orange juice machine, they're both important, but let's face it, the engine is a little higher up the priority than the orange juice machine. And so I think that sometimes that challenge comes as people understanding that sort of difference in perception.
I had a mentor who gave me an image of what you're saying there, Andrew. Said that he watches a dashboard of a jet and or a race car or whatever, and I'm one blinking light, one small blinking light on that whole cockpit console. His eye is on the speedometer and the tack, but I'm a little tiny blinking light. Now, that may be a high warning light that I'm getting ready to blow that engine, but it's up to me to create that context. But I'm just a little blinking light, one of many.
Right.
Right.
And Rob, that's the perfect statement to make, is putting the right context around the information itself. And if I could actually tell everybody that is the most important thing. What is the context that is around this? Anytime that you have information, and you can filter the proper context around that information, it's key. Even in the world that we live in, the security world, with cybersecurity and with what's going on, what is it that, let's say, is being attacked? What is it that the assets that are being attacked or whatever, what is the right context? And so that's so important.
Yeah, I think
tie it to the corporate goal, right?
Yeah, I think and Gordon, you make a good point about cybersecurity, which I think compliance faces similar goals as well. So I think we all deal with this, is that it's not enough to just talk about the problem. You have to put the problem in context with all the other problems and all the other things you're doing. And as a leader, you're thinking about all of those issues, or at least you're trying to deal with them as a whole rather than each individual one. And again, I think we're just really talking around the same point. This thing of, be able to explain how something fits into the grander scheme of things. But Rob, I think you said something that was really good. This alignment with the company mission or vision. So I think that's a good side question to this. Is do you guys feel that that's been a challenge, sort of, in your career, that is getting people kind of to understand that? I mean, what are your thoughts on this sort of vision and the mission of the company and sort of alignment with your team?
I think it's so
essential. I mean, Gordon, yeah, please go ahead.
Well, again, I think this is really the key to good leadership, being able to articulate out to the folks, to be able to understand what their mission is, to be able to understand what is it that the goals of the company are. And that's the key in the leadership side of explaining to the people that it is a priority for them to understand what the mission is, what the goal, and that everybody is moving in the same direction. So many times, as you guys well know, we have companies that we deal with that are larger and everything else, and the ship is not sailing in the proper direction. It's lost at sea. And this is very frustrating, not only for people that are dealing with them, but also internal people that are having to deal with this non-direction of where the ship should be going. So again, that is a real factor in all this.
Rob, what do you think about that?
I agree. Obviously, I mean, it's essential for everyone within a team, particularly your direct reports, to be able to make decisions on their own that are in congruence with the greater goal. So if it isn't clear where we're going, then it doesn't much matter. It sort of reminds me of some Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland. He come to the fork in the road, and the Cheshire Cat's in the tree, and she asked, "Do you go left or do you go right?" And the cat asks, "Well, where do you want to go?" And Alice says, I don't really know. And the cat says, "Well, then it doesn't matter." So the mission in the company is that same thing. You need to know where you're heading so that you can make those decisions on your own. Now, as it relates to communication, is so that when you come in and bring up an issue, you need to relate that this will impact where you want to go, boss. And that is a great way to start that conversation. So I'm a SaaS business. If someone comes in and say, we have a security issue and we're worried about loss of data, you got my attention. To what customers? And then we're off and running. Now something that is specific and maybe mundane now is very relevant to me strategically, because we know customer satisfaction, availability, or this certain customer is of high importance. So that context is fundamental.
So this is a good point, I think, to kind of switch over to really our next question, because we're already on to our next question to some extent. And I was really going to sort of summarize something we tell our clients all the time. And I've done presentations on leadership, and I say this, is kind of one of my key strategies for people is when you go and talk to people in leadership, or when you're writing to them, or when you're communicating with people in a leadership role, start with the threat first. Start the conversation with what you're concerned about, or what you perceive as a threat to the business or to the mission or to the goal, because that's how you can grab attention of a leader. If and I say, if somebody walks into my office and says, Andrew, I'm concerned about this customer, or I'm concerned about our ability to to meet an objective, or I'm concerned about how much money we're spending on something, I think there's there's a threat to our business. I'm way more apt to listen to that and engage, because they're talking about the business, versus somebody who walks into my office and says, this doesn't work, I don't like this sucks, we have a bad this, our SharePoint is a mess, course, whose SharePoint isn't a mess. um, it's like start with the threat to the business versus rather than the vulnerability or the problem. Because when people just come to me and bring me problems, I'm like, get out of here. I don't need another problem. I've got piles of problems, you know, and all you're doing is just throwing another one on the stack. And then on top of that, it's don't come to me with a problem without a solution. One of my sort of big pet peeves amongst sort of, I think, the corporate culture in today's world is this, this doesn't work. I don't like this. This is wrong. And it's like, okay, well, what have you done to kind of figure out an answer to this? Well, I've done nothing. It's like, well, then beat it. I mean, if you're not going to invest effort into trying to fix this, why should I invest effort? So I'd say that's my first sort of strategy I would encourage people to consider. And we've actually got a question, and we'll get to that in just a second. But the first strategy I would give people is start with the threat first, then describe the problem, and then have a solution to that. Don't ever talk to a person in a leadership role without some idea of an answer or a solution, even if it isn't a good one. So what do you guys think about that? What are some of your strategies you would recommend?
So again, I always say God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a purpose, and that's to listen twice as much as we speak.
That's a great phrase.
Again, you're dead on with yes. What I want to do is, if you have an issue, if you have a problem, give me what you think will solve that issue or problem, and I'm absolutely on board with that. It's what I look for from people when they are discussing what is the issue, what is the problem, what do you think your solution is, and then again that's giving a benefit, and that's what I look at as a CEO.
I think the only thing I'd add to both of your comments is the necessity to time box any conversation. So if someone walks in, they've got a problem. First is time box to say, does the leader have time to have this conversation at this time, or would it be better to come back? And then if say now is good, say how long do you have? I got 5 minutes. Well, it's a different conversation if you have 5, if you have 15. So time box first, and be very, very sensitive and courteous to the time constraints that every leader has. So that's the first part is, okay, this is a 5-minute conversation, and as Andrew and Gordon were saying, here's the problem, and here's the solution, and that part is perfect. Maybe another dimension I'd have is do not come into a conversation to a leader as a victim.
Ooh. I'm glad you brought
leaders
that up.
Typically, yeah, I mean, it's amazing. It's like, here's the monkey boss, your problem, and this guy next to me, he's making my life miserable. And you want me to play playground supervisor? Shall we bring in some cookies and we'll talk? It's just not going to happen, right? You'll get immediate shutdown and probably a couple of other things, explicitives as you walk out the door, right? So own it, articulate it, come in with at least 1, if not 2 solutions, and tell boss what you want him to do. I think a lot of people really forget that part. Is the omniscient boss has the right answer, and I'll just go before the idol there, and then I'll walk out with truth. No, we are no smarter than anybody. So come in and just recognize that and own the issue and the solution. In many cases, you're looking for just enablement and permission to go forward. That's what I want out of my staff. Is you own the problem. If you need my feedback, great. If you're stuck, great. But own it. Be accountable for the result. So be accountable for the conversation.
Yeah, I'm gonna take a moment now and froth about that victim thing. I'm really glad you brought that up. I was hoping one of us would, and if it wasn't you guys, it was going to be me. And I will say that, and I think I speak for a lot of CEOs and CIOs and boards of directors, is I know I as a leader and I know a lot of other CEOs that I know, we all have we are extremely sensitive to victimhood because a lot of us are, quite frankly, sick and tired of it. And unfortunately, we do have a bit of a culture um, of victimhood in our country and in the world, frankly. Um, and I know a lot of leaders, if we sense that you're just trying to play the victim card, um, we're just shutting down. I mean, we're done. And we may act like we're listening and we care, but we really don't because and Rob, I think you said it right, is like, it's like, what am I, a playground supervisor here? Am I going to, give everybody we're all going to have a sit down and a kumbaya and a group hug. And I understand there's times sometimes where we need to be empathetic and understanding and let people kind of talk things through. And so I don't want to sound like we're, all CEOs are just a bunch of, selfish, self-centered egomaniacs. Okay, actually, we all are self-centered egomaniacs, but that's beside the point. Uh, we 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 I think we do have this super high sensitivity to victimhood and feeling like people are just are just playing that card, are just, oh, it's his fault that I can't do my job. And I'll have to say, as a leader, I'm very sensitive to that blame factor. If you're just blaming somebody else for your failures, again, I'm kind of done with you. I mean, and I think a lot of boards of directors are the same. And again, sort of information security, this is a big issue for information security. If you go to a board of directors and you say, the reason we got breached is because Jim and Fred and Bob and Mary all didn't do their jobs. I mean, that board's going to go, okay, well, you're fired. Get out of here. Goodbye. I'm done with you. You can't do that. That doesn't fly. You've got to have a better story. It's got to have you got to have a better. You can't just play the blame card and expect to get absolved. You have to kind of take responsibility and be an adult. As you can see, I'm pretty passionate about this. I don't know. Do you guys have anything you wanted to add to that?
I agree. Period. Leave it at that.
One of the things I will say, though, is I've throughout the years and everything else, you still have to be approachable. So the key factor is again, not to have it so that they're actually worried or to communicate whatever the fact is, whatever the reason is, and everything else. I've always held it in high esteem to be approachable. And so that's a key factor also in this, is to be very approachable as a CEO.
Agreed. I wanted to hit a question we actually got from one of the attendees. It said, is the communication style different from executives to boards? Have any of you been on a board and noticed a difference? Is it worthwhile? So basically, I think what the question is if you're a CEO and you're reporting to a board of directors, is that communication different than if you're an employee reporting to a CEO? What do you guys think about that question?
Rob, you go first. I'll go after.
All right. Okay. I found that communication to the board is no different from any other communication within an executive team. So when I was a VP, speaking to a CEO or to fellow CEOs, or it's that level of conversation because most board members have come from that world. But there is always the dynamic of you're speaking to someone who can affect your decisions, so there is some bit of a subordination element, but you quickly get past that. A good board has the well-being and of the organization in mind. The board and the CEO and the executive team are on the same page going towards the same end in an ideal world. So when you have that setting, it's like talking to peers. If you've got a dysfunctional relationship with your board, it is not unlike dealing with an unruly and dissatisfied customer, that there is a superior subordinate relationship, there is disagreement, and you have to be more cautious about what you say. But I don't think that that's isolated to board. I think that is just part of management communication. So I don't find that it's that different.
And I would agree with Rob. I don't find it that much different either. Really the key factor, again, and Rob brought it up, is making sure that the information is appropriate for their understanding of what's going on. And that's a key factor in any relationship, is giving that information that they request, that they can understand and they can act upon. And again, that is key.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Gordon. I think that it echoes back to our earlier conversation, is that first is board meetings are very time boxed as well. You have an agenda item, it is 10 minutes long. So you get to choose how much detail that you want to go into, and also you need to consider the depth and the knowledge of the person you're speaking to. So if you go into inappropriate detail, A, it will take too long, B, you'll lose control of the conversation, and C, you could actually embarrass that board member that they don't know enough to make this decision, and it will just spawn another meeting. So I think it absolutely relates to what we were talking about earlier on a day-to-day basis.
That was a very interesting insight there, Rob. This notion of embarrassing a board member. I don't have a board in my company, which I am happy about some days, like most days. But I think that's an interesting insight that and I think this is a challenge of communication at every level in the organization, but being mindful about the kind of skill level or experience level of the person you're talking to. And again, I think this is applicable really at almost every level of the company, but it's definitively applicable with the leader. And again, I think this is a challenge that us in information security also uniquely have, because, and I see this a lot, these guys, they roll into meetings or committees or whatever, and they start spouting off about, well, the hexadecimal code said this, and if we had to implement a new driver shim on the compliance initiative portal, I mean, they start just kind of rattling off all this technical terminology. And I know that when somebody kind of makes me feel stupid, I kind of shut down on them. I don't like them. It just sort of naturally makes me not like them, and it makes me want to kind of push them away. And I think anytime it's okay to be smart about something and be very, know what you're talking about, but you got to keep in mind that your CEO, and again, this is maybe just another dimension to this context problem, but understanding that your CEO doesn't necessarily have the depth of knowledge you do and needs it kind of condensed and in some cases maybe dumbed down. Now, good CEOs know how to ask questions and kind of dig in where appropriate. But if you embarrass your CEO and make him look like an idiot, I'd say that's a career-limiting move. You're not going to be going far in that company. So we had a question, and I thought this was a pretty good question, and then we're going to get on to the millennial topic here in just a moment. So if you're all hanging in there, we're going to be talking about millennials in just a minute. But I do have one more question. We had one question from the audience that I think is a good question. As CEOs, have you witnessed certain business units that have mastered this, and I'm assuming when he says this, communication, more than other groups? Or is this a struggle across all business departments and units? So basically, if I understand his question correctly, what he's saying is there an aspect of the business that's better at communication than another aspect? I don't know. I'm thinking about this myself. Gordon, Rob, what do you guys think? Can you think of any business groups that seem to have a leg up on the communication?
Go ahead, Rob.
So yes, different functional groups are better at this than others. And actually, I was sort of laughing because certain functional groups are really bad at it. I think historically, IT is bad at it because they they don't see the world from a revenue perspective. So who's really good at it? Sales is really good at it because they're closely aligned to the CEO's heart, um, and they tend to talk at, and sales tends to talk at that higher conceptual level, where when we're in the IT and the compliance side of it, we actually understand what's going on, and it's very difficult to explain. So we're sort of known as that crazy guy in the corner because I just don't know what he's talking about. They tend to overcomplicate things. They want to go down in a level of depth that I don't understand. So I think there is a broad spectrum of people who are good and people who are bad. Now, I don't want to overgeneralize, though. I think that it also has to do with the executive and to whom they're speaking to. Analytical types tend to get lost in the weeds and not bring the extroverts along for the ride. So yeah, I would say it's across the board. I don't think there's anybody who really is good about that as sales is, and anybody who really suffers as much as those that aren't on the revenue gravy train.
Gordon, what do you think?
Well, I'm in agreement. I see so many different factors out there in our industry, and that was one of the reasons actually for developing the company I have now, because so many times I would see my CISO buddy trying to communicate with the board, and the board would actually shut him down because he wasn't communicating in the right way. So what Rob is saying is very, very true. And so, yes, I totally agree with what has been said.
I think you had an interesting perspective on that. This notion that sales is good at communication. I would sort of say I find that sales is good at manipulating communication.
It's definitional, Andrew.
Yeah, they're very good at they're very good at because I mean that's what sales is to some extent, and
right.
Salespeople can be great at communicating a vision, and then I think you're right. They tend to be closer to the CEO and leadership in terms of your revenue. You understand the mission, whatever. But let's face it, most good salespeople, quite frankly, are also good communicators, and they're good. And that means being a good communicator is to some extent being good at using communication to persuade and get what you want. And this is where I would remind everybody, and I'm going to bring my English degree to play here. I bet you guys didn't expect an English lesson as part of this, but I actually have a degree in English. I'm one of the few English majors who has a job. So I kid the English majors. But in persuasion, that the key thing you learn about persuading people is the notion of, using all of the modes of persuasion, using logic, using ethics and appeal to what is right and wrong, and ultimately, though, using emotions, how to kind of tap into those emotional things. Human beings are fundamentally emotional, and I think salespeople and marketing people tend to be good at that because it's very integrated into their job. I think when you get over to the IT side and to finance and some of those places, they think everything should be logical and reasonable, and it should just be laid out in a nice graph and a table. And it's important to remember that that's all important, but that isn't what persuades people. People are persuaded by their emotions. We make all of our decisions emotionally, and then we go back and post-rationalize them. So IT does need to learn how to kind of appeal to the emotions of leadership. And sometimes that's a variety of ways. Sometimes you want to appeal to their fear. Sometimes you want to appeal to their sense of security or their sense of whatever. But that ability to kind of communicate with at the emotional level, and that's where I would encourage everybody. There's actually a really good website out there about and Rob, we've done this in our Vistage CEO group. There's a great site out there called the Sales Brain. It's a company that does neuromarketing, and I encourage everybody to go at least look on the basic concepts that they talk about. But they really talk about how to persuade and communicate using emotions and sort of the deeper, psychological aspects of people to get them to understand. And I think IT people would benefit from some of those concepts. They talk about the 6 stimuli and the 4. Anyways, you can go look at it, and I can provide a link to anybody. It's salesbrain.com, and it's a consulting company that specializes in neuromarketing. So I want to kind of move us along to the next topic, because I think the next topic is of everything we've been talking about. I think this is a big and important issue. So the question of millennials comes up. So as we've said, and I've done presentations on this, and everybody's kind of heard this thing, but by 2025, 75% of the workforce is going to be millennials. If you're in the technology world, you probably already have 75% of your staff as millennials. How do we, and I think all of us are, of course, we are not, myself, Gordon, and Rob, I know we're not millennials. We're Gen Xers. So how do we improve this communication with millennials? Rob, I know you've had, I know you have a fairly large millennial staff. What has been what are the challenges of dealing with millennials and communicating with them and improving the conversations?
Yeah, it's a big topic, and it's easy to generalize. I'm also the father of 3 of those millennials, so I've got that perspective. And it's interesting, what I draw on most is I was based in London for a period of time selling to Europe. So I had multiple cultures, countries, languages, etc. And I see a similarity between those 2 topics in that you have an audience that is speaking in a different way. They assimilate information in a different way, and that's really all that it is. You could create something much more prohibitive, and they don't know what they're talking about, or they don't have this, or they don't this. It's more that the way information is assimilated is just different, and the value structure is different from, let's just use the extreme, a baby boomer. So if I boiled it down into a takeaway, is I grew up in a world where you would sit down and learn something for an hour. You would have a PowerPoint presentation. It would be classroom training. And it was just in case kind of learning. So if this comes up, I've got my little Swiss Army knife of things to know. Where a millennial finds that incredibly frustrating, because I don't think an hour dedicated on a certain topic is just painful. Not that they have a short attention span, is they just assimilate information quicker. So they would much prefer a quick overview of where is everything, like how about a search engine and maybe some keywords and some tags, and they want to learn on a just-in-time basis. So they come up to an issue, they want to be able to search, find the information that they need, and then be able to go forward. And they're very comfortable with this, that their whole life is that way. Now, the other aspect of that, and everything is kind of smartphone enabled in this model, is the sociability side of it. If I don't know, I can ask somebody, and I can ask somebody immediately, and I can do it in a short, bursty text format. And actually, our product has had to evolve towards that, so that we can disseminate compliance information in trainings and other content like that in shorter and shorter and shorter periods. 2 minutes versus 10 minutes, 2 minutes versus 30. And I think that just the appreciation, back to my Europe experience, that they just hear things differently and learn things differently, and you need to figure that out if you want to get to them. It's your responsibility, not theirs.
Gordon, what do you think of that? What has been
Yeah,
your strategy with millennials?
I absolutely echo that with Rob and saying, one of the things that I look at is they want immediate gratification, which I would say goes one step further. When I'm actually talking to some of my employees or whatever, they, in the past for us, we would look at things in a longer period of time. I actually worked for this one company that viewed things in 5-year increments. With millennials, what I see is the instant gratification. They're looking for something to change. They're looking for something, when the communication, I have a partner who doesn't do very well with emails and phone calls, answering them, and it drives my other people crazy. And I learned quite a while ago that I better pick up that phone and I better answer that email because of the way they look at things. It's interesting. I also find that they're very much more social, have social tendencies. And so these are just a few of the things that I actually view and understand with the millennial side. And I think it's a huge plus in our future based on the technical aspects of these folks coming up. I also look at it from a understanding of they tend, just like Rob said, want the information. They get it very, very quickly. They assimilate it very fast. And so knowing that and understanding that, that's a big advantage for a company like mine.
Yeah, I would. Again, I think the insights you guys are giving are phenomenal. And Rob, I think your experience in Europe is a really a great translator for this. This notion that this is a generation that really does assimilate information differently. I mean, I call this sort of the Google or the automation issue. Is that this is a generation that had access to data and information really at a moment's notice. I mean, they could get any piece of information they wanted very quickly. Whereas my generation and generations, older than me, we had to really work to get information. We had to go look it up. There was effort involved in that. So we tended to assimilate information slower. We tended to assimilate more of it when we did it, and we tended to retain it a little bit longer because of that. Because if we wanted instant access to information, it had to be in our head. And so because of that, we have that sort of mentality that data is something, we need to kind of rote it into people, when in reality, you're right, millennials don't want that. It's incredibly frustrating for them to feel that, that this notion of, rote it into me. There's a statistic I read from, I did a lot of research into millennials because I think it's a huge topic that affects not only the workforce, just the future, but it has a huge, massive impact on information security. Information security has got to evolve into really a millennial mindset, whether we like it or not. I mean, it's happening. I mean, the millennials are taking over. It isn't. You can fight it, and you can get angry, and you can call them names, but the fact is, there's just simply more of them than there are us.
We're dying off.
Yeah, we're dying off. So it's just a statistical reality. But there's a statistic I read, which was, and it's something on the order of 73% of millennials expect to customize their computer, their PC or their laptop. And I thought that was an interesting statistic. First off, it has a big information security impact, and that's why that's important. But I saw that as really part and parcel of interacting with millennials, which is that they have this high degree of authenticity detectors. They really want an authentic workplace, and they want to own that workplace. They want it to be theirs. And they want to be able to kind of do, work within their own sort of framework, and that customization thing is part of it. They want to feel like this isn't, they're not just plugged into some giant corporate, machine, but that they're an integral, that they're a part of it, but their part is kind of theirs. And so they want that ownership and that customization. And I think that's a challenge for those of us to communicate, is to remember to kind of allow them to have that ownership and allow them to be involved in it, but be able to show that authenticity. And I think the challenge for a lot of us as leaders is, how do we kind of melt away some of those, those hierarchies that are there, so that we can have a more honest and open and authentic conversation with millennials. I don't know. What do you guys think? I mean, is any thoughts on that?
I think you're really getting to the nut of it. Is the authenticity side of it is so important. And if you think what they observed of their parents that went through the dot-com bust and the change of organizations taking care of their parents, um, changing jobs, not having pension, all of those things, and they are skeptical. They're optimistic, but they're skeptical, and they're just looking for what's real. So I think you're really touching right at the heart of what drives them. And the other element of that, I guess, is going back to what I was saying earlier, is you just need to accommodate it. It isn't going away, as you're saying. It isn't going away, and that is the way they are, and you might wish it different, but it's what it is. So just kind of spend some time to understand where they're coming from, and as true as you can be to it, the better.
I would agree with that. Yes.
I've found that I think a lot of leaders, a lot of companies are, and again, a lot of information security programs are really, really, truly struggling with this. And I don't think they always are appreciative of how big an impact this is going to have on the company, or it already is having. Some industries have somewhat evaded this problem, but for example, I know a guy who owns a trucking company, and he's really struggling to bring in new drivers, and of course the challenge is that that's an environment that really isn't suited to that culture, to millennials, and so building a sort of new culture and what the challenges of that. But I think in the technology world, we have a sort of similar problem. IT departments and information security departments have grown up in these kind of hierarchies, and we've built them as such, and they're not really well suited to millennials, and it alienates them. And one thing about millennials is that if they don't believe in what you're doing, they just leave. I mean, they just go elsewhere. It's not personal, but they're not going to stick around if they don't believe in what you're doing. And so I think the key to communicating with them is always tying back to that moral or ethical dimension of what you do. Here at Anitian, for example, our mission is to build great security leaders, and it's about helping people get better at what they do. Our whole business is kind of focused on that, and there's a sort of moral dimension of that, which is, we believe that is going to help make the world a better place. I mean, I talk a lot about when I give presentations, I remind everybody, I'm one of these people who sort of believed in that whole Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry, a better future kind of thing. I bought into that full on. I want transporters and tribbles. Well, maybe not tribbles, but and I want that better world. And I see us and our business as part of that. And so constantly kind of weaving that into the conversations, I think, is important. And it's hard sometimes, because I think a lot of people feel like, well, this isn't something we talk about at work. We don't talk about these moral things at work. That's not right but the truth is that that's what engages. That's what keeps people, it keeps them at the table.
Yes. So, I agree wholeheartedly, because of what's taking place. Is what we're trying to do, and what they're doing is we're trying to make things better. We're trying to get the information that we need to get the information. We're trying to make the world a better place, let's say, in so many different dimensions, whether it be, the peace side, or whether it be the information is more accurate, more able to make those good decisions that you've heard me talk about in the past, and letting them play a part, letting them understand and make these decisions is a very valuable, not only for them, because they feel a part of what's going on, but it's also good for all of us. So yes, that's perfect.
So we're right about at the end of our time. We got about just got a few more minutes left. If anybody had any questions, this would be sort of your last chance to ask them. Gentlemen, any sort of parting thoughts before we sign off today? Rob, Gordon, any sort of last sort of pieces of advice you'd want to give on how to communicate with leaders?
Rob?
I was going to let you go first. No, I think we've covered a lot of ground, and I guess what's popping in my mind is leaders are very, very busy people. They've got a lot on their shoulders. They're driven to get a lot done. There's that type of animal. But at the same time, they are no different than you are probably to your direct reports. They are not some unicorn. They're like your dad, right? they're the same people, and just keep it real in that sense, and be respectful of how often an executive has to time slice between topics. Just keep that in mind. And if you can talk in primary colors and arrows sweeping up to the right, you just got so much going on the game. and to walk into that room as a contributor to the company's success and that individual, you do great. I mean, that is the recipe, I think, when you boil it down.
So we had a question come in, and I actually think it's a really excellent question. So I don't mean to cut us off, but I think it would be worth answering. So the question was, fear often drives us. As a CEO, what are some of your fears in regard to communicating with your boards and your direct reports communicating with you? And I want to say that that's an excellent question who asked it. You are very correct. I would agree. Fear very much drives a lot of us. And fear is a very, very potent emotion. But I would say fear is a little dangerous, because if you're constantly using fear to drive action, at a certain point, there's a diminishing return on fear. Decisions made in a moment of fear are not usually the best decisions. They may be good for the moment, they may be expedient decisions, but they're not always the best long-term decisions. So my fear as a leader is that I'm going to become consumed with fear. And that's the only thing that's going to drive me. And I know, having run a smaller business for 21 years, I have a lot of fear about that. But I can say that most leaders, they have very high tolerances to risk and fear. You have to be leader. You have to have a sort of boldness to you. And so because of that, I think the level of fear they have is probably quite a bit different than that of an employee. It's not just about losing their job. It's also about saving face. It's about driving forward. It's about getting success. It's about, I think the biggest fear for a lot of leaders is that they're going to fail. They're going to miss the goal. They're not going to get the company where they wanted to get it, and that they're either going to lose their job, or they're going to, they're going to look like failures. And that's, most CEOs are pretty competitive people. So that's an excellent question. Gordon, Rob, did you have any thoughts on this fear kind of concept in our last few minutes we have?
Take it, Gordon.
Well, one of the things that's really, really key is on the fear side is I kind of have a simulation that I tell people, whatever. Fear is like, if I hit somebody over the head so many times, basically they don't feel it anymore because they create calluses, and what happens is anything to the point doesn't get really answered and articulated. And so just like you were saying, Andrew, again, the key factor is in a fear situation or whatever, what is it that you have to be fearful about? What is it that is really the case? And in this particular thing, what I'm talking about is it is the information, and that's the key to all this. And what we're talking about is articulating that true understanding, that true value proposition of what is it that is important, that moving forward over the else. If I'm fearful about losing my business, what is it that's causing that information? What is it that is causing that fear, and what is it that can we change to do that? So again, moving on fear is very, very important to understanding what's creating it, and so that's what I would say.
I mean, we're primal animals. Fear is actually a good thing. It heightens our senses. Where we need to focus as leaders is it real or is it perceived? Is it something that needs immediate attention, or is it something that can be deferred?
Exactly.
So I think fear is actually a very good thing. It's an incredible motivator. It also can wreck one's psyche to shreds. So I just think fear is good. Keep it in balance.
Yeah, fear is, and again, I have sort of mixed feelings about fear. I think it can be a great motivator, but like a lot of things overused, it becomes a dangerous weapon. It's kind of the tactical nuclear weapon of leadership.
Yeah.
Sometimes you've got to use it when it's necessary, but it can have lasting impact, and sometimes that's not always good. The blast radius can sometimes consume things you don't want it to. So, and I would say as an employee, the same principle applies, especially in information security. Meter that fear out carefully. A little bit can go a long way. We have an addiction in information security to fear, and we really play that card too much. And there's a reason that when you're in first or second grade, they give you that boy who cries wolf story. It's not only is it a great story, but it's a great lesson of life, which you can't just keep playing that fear card. It just isn't going to work eventually. Gentlemen, I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap. We are at 11 a.m. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Rob, Gordon, thank you very much. I really appreciate you doing this. This has been a lot of fun. I felt like we had a great chat. This is the insights, I think, were great, and I hope everybody in the audience got something out of it. We would love to hear from you at this point. If you have any additional questions or concerns, please send them to us here at Anitian, and we would be happy to answer them. And again, we will try to make the audio recording of this available later today or tomorrow. And with that, I will go ahead and wrap. Again, gentlemen, thank you very much. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Bye.
Thank you.